Quad66. So on test, this is the Hummingbird, NewBeeDrone Hummingbird Race Spec Quad. Kelvin sent this over for me to test it out, and that right there is what I absolutely love about this quad. I am finding the throttle control, for whatever reason, just super intuitive, and that helps so much. This quad is up there with the old silverware brushed quads, flying in angle mode in terms of how intuitive it is to fly. It's got some issues which I will go over in a second, but I wanted to give you a little bit of flight footage first. But that's the big thing. So this is a super light build. It's on their light AF as F frame, and it's got their 5-in-1 board, direct solder motors with 30,000 kV 0702s. I do have a couple little modifications on it. One is the picture you're seeing is not coming from the NewBeeDrone BI camera that came on it. It is coming from an older BI camera that I had, and I will, on the next battery, show you what the camera looked like that came with the quad, because it is decidedly different, and unfortunately different for the worse. I'm not sure if it's a one-off issue or if it's just the new state of affairs for these cameras, but it's not good, and I'll show you that. I'm hoping it's just a one-off, because one of the things I was really hoping about this little bind and fly is that this could finally be a quad where you just go and buy the bind and fly it. And it's close, but the camera might be an issue, a thing that you have to change out. The motors are bushing motors, and so far they're pretty smooth. They're not little rattly pieces of mess like the Happy model and rebranded versions where they get super rattly. They're not super efficient, but they're powerful. Let me show you before I run out of battery here. A couple little throws. So, no problem throwing it, and this is kind of a pretty half-cooked battery already. I am flying on the 300 milliamp hour. And these are, I think, the WeBleed FPV version, because I have these in BT2. So this comes with the G&B connector, the A30, and I did swap out to that's kind of a short battery. Normally I'm getting, I don't think this one was fully charged. Normally I'm getting 330, but let me show you the other camera. Alright, so this battery isn't charged, it's just a little storage charge battery, but I wanted you to see what the camera looked like for the one that came on the bind and fly. You can see that this is just a pretty big difference here in terms of like the brightness and sharpness, and I don't know if this is just a one-off that I got, but the camera was bad enough I threw it on this other quad that I know looked pretty good to see what it looked like. The other thing I want to show you is this right in here. This is just a lot tougher to maintain kind of the altitude. It's sort of like a throttle discipline issue, but with this quad I have to work a lot harder to not get it to kind of bounce around, and you can just see that for me, because of how much work I have to do on the throttle there, it's a less intuitive quad to fly. Now, once you're on the power, I don't think that difference is there, but when you're just flying really low in like that, that's a pretty big difference. Okay, let's go to the bench and talk about this new Race Spec quad a little bit more. Here is the iteration of the Race Spec quad that I'm flying. Clearly not quite the box stock bind and fly that was sent over, but close enough for me to give you some opinions on it, I think. This was, prior to the Race Spec showing up, this was my daily driver, which again is that NewBeeDrone 5-in-1 board, that Hummingbird board, but I had the 0702 bearing motors from NewBeeDrone on there. since the arrival of this race spec quad, this is my new daily driver when I feel like whooping. I do prefer flying this one. But there's some caveats I think I need to talk about. The big one is the camera. So the camera I have on here is actually an old BI camera that I had sitting around. I pulled it off of this other quad here. But if we look at the back of the camera there, sorry about the little noises from that connector hitting the camera. But if we look at the back of the camera there, you can kind of get a sense of what this camera looks like. And then I'll show you the back of, here's the BI camera that came on the race spec. Clearly, the back of that board looks quite different. Clearly a different camera. And then if we look at the size of the board, a little harder to tell, but the new camera, so the race spec camera, which is now on this quad with the red props, is slightly smaller than the old BI camera. If you look at the size of the board, it's just very small difference, but it is a tiny bit smaller. And I think that's an important thing to talk about, because when you talk about a bind and fly, one of the things you want to do is you want to say, can you just buy this thing? If you have to replace any major part, it starts to get into the, well, do you buy the bind and fly, or do you just start parting it, piecing it together piece by piece? And the camera, not that they're super expensive, but it's sort of a big deal because it's an important part of the flying experience. And unfortunately, with this camera that came on the race spec quad, the video quality was poor enough to where I would say you just got to change it out right off the bat. I don't think it's worth flying. And that's a little bit unfortunate. I'm hoping that's just a one-off. Hopefully I just got a bad sample, which happens. There's a lot of variability in these little micros. And hopefully the BI camera quality is still there. I thought that was a selling point about NewBeeDrone because I thought they had a nice implementation. So they use these really tiny plugs, and the camera's plugged straight into the board, so there's really not really a weight penalty. And so if you can do it without really having much of a weight penalty at all, you can have a camera that's just plug and play swappable. I much prefer that because these cameras do break when you smash them around. And so with that said, I think, if you get the race spec quad and you're really underwhelmed by the camera quality, then you do want to change the camera. And if you do change the camera, though, I recommend going down this route. So NewBeeDrone sells these little pigtails, so three-wire with the connector wired up. And I recommend doing it that way, of changing the wires out at the camera rather than on the board, because on the board you can get a couple pins for the power to the camera, but the video pin you have to get off the connector, and it's kind of a bear to solder. It's a really small joint. So if you are going to swap the camera, go ahead and swap out the wires to the camera. What else is different? So camera. Frame. This frame is the regular V3 frame, not the light AF frame. And I think the main difference is that I think the ducts are a little bit taller and a little beefier. And I'm not really worried so much about the durability standpoint. What I do like about the regular V3 frame is that it's still super light. It's like 2.94 grams according to NewBeeDrone. And it's only half a gram heavier than the light AF frame. And it has a better profile when you look at the noise. So with that extra little bit of material, it does a better job damping out the motor noise. And to me, that's important because that lets me push down the filters and then push up the PIDs and get a really locked in feeling on the quad. And I think that's a little bit more important for me personally than that half gram to just get that slightly better thrust to weight ratio. Now, depending on your flying style and things like that, you might feel the other way. And I think it's valid if you want to go and say, well, to me, every little bit of thrust to weight ratio is important, and go with that light AF frame. I think it's a perfectly fine frame. You just have to be a little bit more cautious with not letting your motors get beat up, being a little bit more cautious with your PID tune and your filtering. Other things, the props here, those are different. So typically the Hummingbird race spec comes with these ASI tri-blades. And I haven't liked these props. I didn't like them on other quads, other whoops that I've built up. But for whatever reason, it's actually a decent combination. So with these 0702 30,000 kV Hummingbird motors, these props fly fine. You don't have to change them out. And it's more of a preference thing where I just slightly prefer the biblade. The way that I'm flying these biblades is that this is a, as you prop, it's a quad blade cut down to biblade. And it's actually really easy to cut down. All you do is take a side snip and just cut down the side of it. And I actually get better balance out of these cut down as biblades than I do from the gem fans. These are great props too. I like these gem fan biblades a lot. But for whatever reason, I can actually get a cut down quad blade, cutting it down to biblade, slightly better balance than the gem fans. And it doesn't make a huge difference. Those props fly very similar. But me being me, I kind of like doing this. You know, it's a little bit eccentric, but you know, I cut down my quad blades to biblades, and that's how I fly it. The motors, I think, are super interesting. I love these motors at a very like visceral level, because these are such purist motors, like in terms of like a racing purity. And what I mean by that is that they went to the length of just going ahead and using the winding as the wire. So if you look at this, this is the copper winding. It's that enamel-coated wire that comes out. And this I've kind of bent it out of shape, but it comes out to 3 prongs, and that gets soldered directly to the board. So there's no connection in here. With all our other Woot motors these days, I personally don't like this choice that they've gone to, where these motors now have a PCB. So the motor windings go down to the PCB, get soldered to the PCB, and then the other wires get soldered to the PCB. The motor wires get soldered to the PCB. And so you're basically adding resistance, because every time you do a solder connection, you add resistance. It's just simply more efficient to have the wire go straight. And the net result of it is that these are light motors. I'll show you the weight on them. On my scale, I'm getting about 1.3 grams. And for comparison, here's a WeBleed, so it's a rebadged Happy model basically, 1.43. And then a badged Happy model. Oh, look at that one. Oh, nope, I just put, sorry, I was about to say that Happy model came in light. That was a Hummingbird motor. Let's get this one on here, it's the right one. And 1.38. So basically, these Hummingbird motors are coming in like a 1/10 of a gram lighter than the Happy model or the WeBleed motors, those great trash magic motors. Other interesting thing about these motors, and this is not necessarily a compliment, but if we look at the magnets, if you look at the magnet, yeah, there you can see it right there. They're not quite as rounded. They look more like pillows to me, versus most Woot motors. See if we can focus in on this. Are super round. There, you can see it right there. So the magnets in most, well, let's see up top here, can you see it? And I'll try this one so you can see it here. I'm not sure if I'm able to show that on camera. Focus in close. Maybe right there you can see it. So that rim on the inside is the magnet, and it's got a really smooth round rim versus the NewBeeDrone motors. There you can see them, they're kind of pillowy. Something about these motors works though. I absolutely love the way these things fly. Maybe not the most efficient. They feel powerful enough, but the thing I really love about them is the throttle control around hover. It's just so easy to maintain the altitude of the quad. It just, for me, love it, love it, love it. And so, although I can't say everything about this motor is perfect, the end result is pretty awesome in terms of how flyable they are. Other little features of the motor is they do not have that pesky little C-clip. You can see it's just got kind of a wide spot coming down, so there's not that big C-clip stress riser there. Hopefully that helps with durability some. Size of the motor. They look smaller diameter as far as the outside of the bell goes. making that up? You tell me. Let me get this, compare black to black. I feel like the outer diameter might be a tiny bit smaller. I'm not saying that these aren't both 702s, but I'm not really saying that any of this matters at the end of the day. Anyways, so far these motors are flying pretty smooth. We'll see how they hold up durability-wise. You know, even the Trash Magic Happy Model motors, they start out pretty smooth, but very quickly get very rattly and noisy, and not to my taste, but excellent motors in terms of efficiency. What else do I have to say about this quad? The battery connector, I switched to a BT2. I don't know why. So I wanted to go to a 90-degree angle on the way it's soldered. And for whatever reason, when I did that, I switched over to BT2 connector instead of using the GNB one that came with it. I don't think there's any performance difference there, but I think it does bring up an important point. If you are using these connectors to go 90 degrees like that, what you want to do is the pins have a flat side, and you want to grab the pins with like nail splice or something, and you want to rotate it so the flat side, see if I can do this, keep it in focus. You want to rotate it so the flat side stays on the outside. That way when you solder the motor or the battery wires on, the battery wires are on the outside. And it keeps it nice and clean, no risk of bridging the two across or anything like that, easy to solder. And when I did that, that created, took off some of the tension. So the motors that came, or the battery wires that came on it, were just barely long enough to where you can get the battery in, but I was putting a fair amount of strain, I felt, on the wires every time I plugged the battery, plugged and unplugged the battery, and I felt that that was going to fail pretty quick. So I just went ahead, before having to replace the wires off the board, I just converted it over to that 90 degree, and that saves a little bit of length on the wire, and now it's a nice, comfortable plug in, plug out situation. Surprises, other surprises on the bus board. It is a 5-in-1. The VTX is 25 milliwatt, which for me is what I like because I don't know if it's a whoop. How far are you going to fly? Like, what do you need more than 25 milliwatts for? And if you have the VTX on the board, do you really want it generating more heat than the 25 milliwatt does? I don't personally think so. But surprise for me, this little whip antenna is working really well. One of the things I figured out was that when you have the antenna, it's important to kind of keep it up there. It's kind of obvious, like keep it up there away from the board, but I was surprised if I just kind of tried to stick it off to the side, I was getting really poor reception. But when I stuck it up like this, and I just kind of bent this and it just tucks into my mount there, I get good reception. The reception is good enough to where I think I need to ditch my little dipoles that I've been flying on my whoops and just make it fit like that and keep it up in the air, and the reception is fantastic. This does come with Express ROS baked in. There's your antenna wire right there. So it is a 5-in-1 board, and that's part of why you can get the weight so light on these. Now I did change out the canopy. The main reason I changed it out was, so how does this thing sit? It sits like this. With the canopy that came from NewBeeDrone, the camera angle was just a little bit too aggressive. I'm a little bit more mortal than what I guess the target audience is. And so I need a little bit shallower camera angle. So I switched over to my camera mount. But what I really like about the camera mount is that it's a cam forward design. I like having my camera moved forward on the quad. It gets the props out of the view a little bit better. I also like this perspective. And also, if you smack the camera, it's not really in any danger of smacking into the board and causing harm. And little did I know, because I've been flying this board, or a version of this board, for a long time now. Not really crazy long, but fair bit of time. And I've never had issues with breaking my board. And then I hear about all the boards breaking with the race spec quad. And that was before they moved the camera forward. And so, as it turns out, I've been protecting my board, not even realizing that that was an important thing. But I think that's kind of a minor thing. The camera mounts are, you can get my file. You can find a ton of files to print out little camera holders and things like that. So that's a minor issue. Let me show you the dry weights. So on my scale, dry weights is 16.4 grams. So if we were on the AF frame, that would put it right at 16 or just under 16 grams. And obviously there's some other little differences with the props and things like that, and the canopy. But yeah, the quad is light. It legitimately, out of the box, is a very light quad. And I think it makes, other than the camera issue, I can pretty much like wholeheartedly recommend it. Like, just go buy it. It's a good value, works well, flies well. My only reservation at all is really on the camera. Hopefully that's just a one-off for me. And I'm kind of half tempted to buy a camera from NewBeeDrone, another BI, just to see if this is the new normal or if, I got unlucky on the one batch that got sent to me. That's what I have from the bench. I'm just trying to think real quick whether there was anything else I wanted to cover. I don't think so. So let's go through Betaflight and show you a couple things on Betaflight and then wrap up this initial review. Here's the quad now plugged into Betaflight, and I think there's just only a few things to kind of go over. One of those things is, so on the configuration tab, I do recommend going ahead and flipping off air mode here. Initially it comes with air mode permanently enabled, and what I recommend doing is turning it off here and then putting air mode for yourself on a switch. The reason for that is air mode is a big culprit with having the quad freak out more when you bump stuff or getting stuck to walls. And so if you turn off air mode, you can actually unstick yourself by like lowering the throttle. It will fall down, and it tends not to freak out quite as much when you bump stuff. So with most of my flying, when I'm kind of trying to fly a sort of racing style, I have it off. If you're in a bigger open area, flying freestyle, you probably want to put it on. Air mode doesn't help. It does handle better when you're off throttle, but it's got the issue of increased touchiness and getting stuck to walls. Power and battery settings, that all seemed fine. PID tuning is kind of interesting. So I thought the tune, it feels fine. I didn't actually mess with that because I didn't really see a ton of reason to. But with the sliders, it's so easy now. If you just want to push the master up, or down, like so if your quad is flying a little angry, it's a little too jittery for you, just kind of push that master down a tiny bit. If you want to try and put in a little bit more, lock it in a little bit more, particularly if you're not on the light AF frame. If you're on the slightly heavier frame, you can probably push the master slider up a little bit. This was a little bit funny. So jitter reduction, default is 7, they turned it down to 1. It seems fine though, so I just kind of left that there. I'd really need black box to see if that's really making a big difference in terms of the traces with the RC link. But these settings are pretty standard for like 500 with ERLS, Express LRS. I thought this dynamic idle value was really nice, 150. That worked really well for me. It's actually the number I've settled in on my other quads, interestingly enough. Thrust linearization at 20 felt fine. So unless you have black box, I generally wouldn't mess with much stuff other than push the master slider up and down a little bit if you'd like. Obviously throw in your rates. Filters was kind of interesting. You can see just how tame they are on the filters, and I think that's probably necessary for a couple reasons. One is I think they're sort of missing the boat here a little bit. This is the stock filter setting, and I'll show you what I recommend doing. With the gyro RPM filter, I really don't see a reason for 3 harmonics. I think on these whoops it's really driven more by frame noise and stuff like that. So to save yourself a little bit of latency, I would bump that down to 1 gyro harmonic. Now, somebody might come along with some black box data and prove me wrong, and if that's available, I'm happy to learn from that. But in my own black box logs with whoops, I just haven't seen the need for the other 2 harmonics on the RPM filter. I don't think this Q factor, so the dynamic notch filter with a Q factor of 500, it just doesn't work. It's too narrow. To get any use out of this, I've found that you have to turn that up to 300, so this widens the notch. And also, you can't, with the BMI 270 gyro, you can't stop at 600. You got to go up to 900. Otherwise, you get this kind of like, you know, if you look at your noise over here, you're going to get this kind of swell of noise when you don't bring that out to 900. Under the hood with that too, if you really want to get fancy, you can go in here and get RPM filter Q. Why is it not happy? I'll try and reconnect this. It's funny, that didn't save. Did my quad stop talking? I don't know. Seems like it stuck that time. Weird. Do I just have too much stuff connected to my computer? It's a possibility. Because this was working fine before. This is the first time I'm seeing this issue. There it goes. Okay. So RPM filter Q. If we take a look at that, the default is 500. I think you can push this up to 750 and save on a little bit of latency there. So we save that. It's our RPM filter Q. Go up to 750. And let's save that in there. And I think that filtering strategy will work pretty well. If you are on the slightly heavier frame, you can probably work these down as well too, these sliders. But be careful with that. You know, look, if you don't know what you're doing, don't mess with it. If you do know what you're doing, you know, kind of look for your usual stuff of like trilling and the quad get a little jumpy or angry on you. What else? Oh, in motors, they had this set props in. I just changed it to props out. I thought that was kind of like a settled thing, like that we just do props out now. I could be wrong, so if I'm wrong on that, let me know. If there is a reason to run props in, just let me know. And then otherwise, you know, that pretty much covers any kind of the stuff that you need to kind of think about. This one I highly recommend. See, it's not sticking. That's weird. Am I like going outside of like allowed values? Is Betaflight saying no to me? Sorry, this is dragging on. I'm just curious to figure out what's going on with that. It seemed to stick. Yep, that's stuck. Let's get this to 900. I think I just have too much stuff connected to my computer. So I'll leave it at that. This worked fine before, and I think with everything I've going with recording and stuff, it might be causing some kind of issue. I'm not sure how it would do that, but it seems to be doing that. All right. So that is what I have for the NewBeeDrone. Let me see now. It's not. Let's stop talking. Don't know why. Hopefully that's not like an issue developing. But anyways, yeah. So that's what I got so far on the Hummingbird race spec quad. Couple issues as I mentioned, but otherwise I really, really love flying it. You know, I do say this with like, if you know silverware brushed quads, you know how big of a compliment this is to say that I do feel like this quad is as intuitive as to fly as those brushed silverware quads were in angle mode. That's a huge, huge compliment on how well that quad is flying. All right, till next time, cheers.